I just finished watching the new Avatar movie, and I won't lie, I have some really conflicting opinions about it. So I'm just kind of going to freeform rant about it a little bit. To start with, I absolutely adored seeing this adult version of Team Avatar. I think that the designs for them are on point. I think that everybody looked absolutely fantastic. I do wish that they had kept the original way that they drew the noses. The pointy anime noses aren't my favorite, but they don't take away. Like, they're definitely still each recognizable as each character, and I think that that's more important than anything else. I can chalk it up to just changes in art style as things go on. It was just a little bit jarring to see, but that's the only thing that like really bugged me about the art direction. I think that everything looked absolutely beautiful, and I think that that was a huge point to the creative team that worked on it. I think they did a fantastic job taking those old drawings, the old style, and transforming it into something new that works with this new style of animation that they're doing. I think it looks absolutely phenomenal, frankly. I will say, one of the things that I really liked about the OG Avatar world was the way that they handled the spirit world, because I always thought it was cool that the spirit world was somewhat more natural in nature, even though it felt like it was something very otherworldly, something not of this earth. It was still very natural. It had those muted earth tones and the big trees and the swamps and things that made it feel wild, but still within the bounds of something that I would consider to be a natural state of things. And partially this is why I didn't like the way that the spirit world was depicted in Korra as much. The bright colors, the weird attitudes of some of the inhabitants of the spiritual world were just a little bit off-putting to me. And initially I had thought, well, okay, maybe it has more to do with the way that each avatar is connecting to the spirit world. So we get Aang, who's much more spiritual and I would say a little bit closer connected to nature, as we see in the episode with Heibai and the forest burning down and how upset he was about the natural order of things being disturbed like this. Meanwhile, Korra doesn't really have any spiritual anything going on. She's not super connected to the natural. She's lived in cities most of her life. She seems to be riding the wave of that new industrial side of things a little bit more and embodying that side of human progress, which I think is cool, granted. So the spirit world being brighter colors and more garish and more in your face makes sense if that's how she's interacting with the rest of the world. So I always kind of figured that maybe that was at play. But now with this new movie, we get that sequence towards the end where they enter the spirit world for a bit while trying to essentially fast travel. It's calling to mind more of those Korra-like frames of how the spirit world works, and it really took me out of the movie because that is not the spirit world that I associate with Aang and with the original Avatar. So if I'm looking at these original Avatar characters and you're taking me into the spirit world, I'm expecting to see that moody, atmospheric, kind of mysterious sort of Avatar-like spirit world. I don't even know how else to put it. So it's a little bit jarring for sure, and not something that I particularly enjoyed, even though I thought the way that they introduced it with everything being out of balance and that affecting each of the characters' physical bodies based on where their mentalities were at, putting them off balance was kind of cool. I liked that a lot. It felt very strange. But then again, it also makes me think, if that's what the unbalanced spirit world is in Avatar, and if we're contrasting that with the original dark and broody spirit world of the original Avatar, then maybe the reason why the spirit world looks like that in Korra is because of the spirit world being so out of balance. Something that we already know is happening in Korra. I guess you could argue that it's like that, but I also have a lot of opinions about Korra, like the series Korra and the main titular character, come to think of it, that are not super flattering. So I do have some biases regarding it. So when I see something that's a little bit more Korra-like in Avatar, it does get me to inherently dislike it at first, even if there are some logical reasons why it might be like that. Back in the day, anime movies were largely not canon. You would go and watch Dragon Ball Broly and you wouldn't expect Broly to show up in the main timeline of the show, you know? Like, that's very much its own separate thing that's happening. To me, this movie kind of felt like that. And I think that's because it's caught between this cross-section of the original series and then Korra. So you kind of already know what happens to most of the characters, so having high stakes like one of the characters dying feels a little bit inconceivable. That said, the movie still did a great job at inviting me to hold my breath and hope that the characters are okay and wait to see what happens and get worked up if Aang is saying, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. And I'm thinking, no, you can't die, you have so much left to do. Even though logically I understand that he won't die for another 40-ish years, it does do a good job at making me feel the intensity of the moment, and I think that's great. There just isn't enough of a change of status quo between what happens at the beginning of the movie versus at the end of the movie. When you consider it, like at the beginning of the movie, Aang is trying to, I don't know, get in touch with his heritage. Katara even says, you spend much more time at the air temples than you do with me. Katara is working on Republic City, and we get this sense that Aang is helping her with that when he's not out doing Avatar stuff or wandering about in the ruins of the air temples. At the end of the movie, that's still kind of what he's doing, helping Katara build Republic City and wandering about the air temples. Not much has changed physically. We can look at the mentality of the character. His arc over the entire course of the movie is learning to accept that he's the last Avatar. Except, hasn't he kind of already accepted that? We see a lot of this over the course of the main series where Aang is constantly confronted with the idea that he's the last Avatar. Now, it might be different now because he's in his 20s. I'm currently in my mid-20s. Trust me, I understand what it feels like to have time be running out rapidly on you. And I don't even have an entire dead culture resting on my shoulders like Aang does. That kind of responsibility is enormous. And logically, I understand how that would present once he has children. We know that he ends up, at least during his lifetime, only with Tenzin as an airbender, and therefore pouring all of his time into teaching Tenzin about airbending. That makes sense to me. But Aang being in his mid-20s and worrying about this, while reasonable, just feels a bit stagnant of his character, especially because I am one of the people who read the comics for Avatar back when I was a teenager, and a central part of that first 3-comic run that they released was about Aang finding the Air Acolytes, this group of people who devoted themselves wholeheartedly to learning about air nomad culture because air nomad culture was wiped out. Now, Aang was upset about this at first, but after talking to Katara and the other members of the gang, he slowly starts to realize that if he can rely on the accolades, he doesn't have to shoulder the burden of being the last bastion of a dead culture anymore. Now, it doesn't fix him being the last airbender. That part does suck quite immensely. But again, we get in the comics this idea that he's the last airbender, the last air nomad, and therefore he needs to protect his culture. And again, in the comics, this has already been addressed, where he has the nomads and he has the family he's going to eventually start with Katara. And Katara mentions this in the comics, that once we start a family, you'll have someone else to teach airbending to. And he seems at peace with this multiple times now in the original series, in the comics, and now again in the movie. It just feels like a stagnant character arc. It doesn't feel like anything major has changed between the beginning and the ending of the movie, other than we, the fans, get to see one more adventure with Team Avatar. So when we see at the end of the movie that he's created the Air Temple, that's great. I'm so stoked about that. But they make it out to seem like he's inducting these air acolytes for the first time into the full culture, which isn't the case, at least as far as I'm aware, with the knowledge of what canon materials I have. Every time at the beginning of the movie, he's talking about, if I die, the culture dies with me. Yes, yeah, the airbending itself dies with you, that's true, but the culture is living on, at least in an academic sense. But maybe I'm being a little bit too reductive about it. From the original series, Sokka is one of my favorite characters. He's just so freaking awesome. He's funny, he's level-headed, he's cool in a crisis, he's great. But somehow in the movie, he just felt a little bit watered down. For one thing, I kept thinking, wasn't Sokka the leader of the gang? Like, maybe I have the misconception. It's been a hot minute since I've rewatched the original Avatar series. But I always thought that he was the one kind of holding everyone together, the leader, the one everybody looked up to, the one issuing the orders, the one keeping everyone on track, you know? So it felt very strange when they got into a little bit of hot water and Zuko took charge? It's not necessarily a bad choice. He is the Fire Lord. He would be much more versed in actually leading and taking charge at this point than he would have been back when they were teenagers. But then they also went and made Sokka very panicky. And Sokka is a panicky character. He does panic several times over the course of the main series. He does have his moments where he just completely freaks out. And I always like that about him. That is a core tenet of his character. It's great to see that represented again. However, in the main series, we're mostly seeing him freak out in what I would consider to be comparatively low stakes environments. They're typically generally safe places for him to have a freak out, but he's always been pretty level-headed in moments of actual crisis, which I always really admired about his character. There's an idea that someone can have fast-clearing versus slow-clearing enzymes, where if you have fast-clearing enzymes, you will thrive better under pressure and in intense situations. These are the kinds of people that would get into a car crash and feel afterwards like they had woken up in that moment and they're able to be calm about what's happening and figure out the right course of action. And I always thought that Sokka was one of those characters. So when the ship starts to go sideways, it's been ripped apart, everything is going terrible, and Zuko takes charge and he's giving Sokka commands, it just feels a little funny. Also, I want to note that Sokka is inherently a goofy guy. That's part of the deal with him. He's known for the quippy one-liners and the silly moments where he's adding a little bit of comedic levity to a situation. But he did feel a little bit too comic reliefy, I guess, in a way. And I would normally just be like, it's been a couple of years. He's not in a war mindset anymore. When he was a kid, he didn't get to have much of a childhood because he was expected to protect the village and he had all of these responsibilities foisted on him. When he was traveling around with Aang and them, he was the oldest, so he was the one, at least he felt like he was the one, who had to keep everybody in line, keep things moving, come up with plans, make sure everybody adheres to the plans, you know. So while it does feel a little bit out of character for him to be so incredibly goofy in the movie, I could see it in a situation where he's been in a safe place for multiple years. He didn't get to have a childhood, so maybe now he's letting his inner child run free. That's why he's being a little bit more exaggerative. That's why he's being a little bit more silly. I understand that, but it also felt like they kind of nerfed him almost. He did great in the fight with Taga where Katara confronted him. He was the only one who was closing the gap and actually getting close to landing hits on that guy, which is pretty impressive and very cool to see him working in tune with everybody else. Really, really loved him using the boomerang and Katara icing the back half of it to turn it into kind of a makeshift club to hit Taga with. I thought that was cool as hell. But I kept thinking, like, where's his sword? And where's his, like, fighting proficiencies? My partner was quick to mention, well, maybe he's just gotten a little bit rusty, considering it's been multiple years. It seems like that's not exactly what his deal has been. He's been rebuilding the Southern Water Tribe. He's been making himself a little workshop where he can work on his inventions and trying to put the experience he got from blacksmithing into actually creating rather than just being a schematics guy. And I think that those are all really reasonable points. But it just felt a little off to me that he wouldn't try to bring a sword or something on this grand adventure that they're going on, knowing that they're going to be fighting against a group of people that's supposedly searching for a super powerful weapon as far as he's been informed. Why wouldn't he have a sword? Why wouldn't he have a club? Why wouldn't he have his cool sword club that he had in the original series that was so sick and I always freaking loved? To that effect, a lot of the characters kind of felt a little bit Flanderized. Now, I thought that most of the characters were very, very well done. I actually really liked how they were careful to use parts of the character that felt very much like them. Like, they didn't just get rid of Aang's anger. That was great. I love him getting angry. I'll talk about that more in a second, though. But there were also these moments that, while I was watching it with my partner, every now and again something would happen, and instead of being like, oh, here's this thing from the main series, this is a great callback to this thing from the main series, we found each other quoting the Ember Island players. Particularly, there's a moment where Katara goes to confront Taga about what's going on and brings up Republic City and how everybody's going to work together in harmony and all of that. And she starts to say this line about how it gives us hope. And instead of being like, wow, what a poignant moment for the film, me and my partner looked at each other and almost in unison went, it just gives me so much hope. From the Ember Island players. So it feels a little bit bad when I'm watching something that has these OG characters in it, and I'm constantly being reminded of the episode where they poke fun at these characters and reduce them to one-note playthings. But with that said, I can see where they did put in a huge amount of effort to make sure that all of the characters still felt like the characters, still had the same basic flaws, and had the same basic highlights as the characters. Like I said earlier, when Aang got angry, that was fantastic. The moment where Taga came up to him talking about, we don't need them, let's just go and do the airbender stuff ourselves, I'm thinking to myself, you just iced his wife, he's about to go apeshit, and then once Aang realizes that he iced his wife, he went apeshit. It felt very much like the Aang character from the original series. Also, Toph was just perfect. I don't have any notes about Toph. She was fantastic as a character. The only note I have is that I wanted to see more of her. I thought she was great. I think they got her perfect. Or even closer to the end when they're going to get into the ocean spirit and use that like a fast travel device, which is crazy, by the way. And Sokka goes to turn around, and Zuko reaches out and grabs him by the back of the shirt and goes, face your death with honor. And me and my partner just go, honor! There were also moments of the movie that I felt like were leading up to something that could have been much cooler than what we actually got. I really liked the whole idea of this lost avatar and this big air civilization and all of that. I thought that that was handled very well. But although we knew from the beginning that Taga was going to end up being the villain, there was a moment of time where I was very excited that this lost avatar, who seems to be somewhere close to the beginning of the avatar cycle, was going to be someone who screwed things up monumentally, but believed that she was doing something for the betterment of humanity. I could see a world in which the lost avatar was someone who didn't have a lot of guidance and so thought that the best way to invite harmony and have balance would be for the airbenders to just subjugate everybody since they're so much more spiritually enlightened. I could see that being the case. I could even see her, once Aang engages with her in the spirit realm, admitting her faults and failures. No, that was the wrong thing to do. I was in the wrong for doing that. However, at the time, I thought this was the only way that I could unite the nations. I thought something like that would be really cool. And especially because we have the new Avatar series coming out in October, which paints Korra in a negative light. Although I'm pretty sure that's going to be a bait and switch, kind of like how everybody believed that the Avatar had abandoned them, but Aang was just trapped. I think everybody's going to hate Korra, but then there's going to be some reveal that she was actually doing her best or something. But I thought it would be cool with what we know about Korra being such a quote-unquote screw-up of an Avatar that you would end up looking back in history to see an Avatar that really did monumentally screw things up because she thought that she was bringing balance to the world this way. Now, again, I do not dislike what they did with that lost Avatar. I thought that was sick as hell. I am kind of frustrated that they dangled this thing in front of Aang to get back airbenders and then took it away from him. It just felt a little much, honestly. Also, because we know in Korra that there are more airbenders in the future because of the harmonic convergence or whatever. I hate Korra, I really do. But we do know that in Avatar canon, there is going to be more airbenders. Aang doesn't know that. So we, as the audience, have a level of dramatic irony that Aang is trying and failing and suffering all for this idea of not being the last airbender, but we know that he will not be the last one, and it sort of takes the stakes away. I also kept getting stressed out by Aang. He constantly was like, I'm the last airbender, I'm the last one at the beginning of the movie. It's just me, if I die, that's it. And I'm like, this feels like a great opportunity to open up to your wife and maybe consider having children. Because we already know that in Korra, he has 3 children and he only ends up with Tenzin in his lifetime, who is a bender. But it just feels silly to me that they would be in their mid-20s and there weren't any children yet. Knowing how important continuing air nomad culture is and trying to have another airbender so he's not the only one, it just feels a little bit silly to me that Aang would be spending so much time going to these old air temples, walking around, trying to connect to his culture, when he could be using the time to actively create new members of his culture. You can make an argument that maybe Katara wasn't ready for children, maybe she still has a bunch of stuff that she wants to do, maybe she's really, really preoccupied with Republic City and getting that up and running, so she doesn't feel like she has time for children, but I feel like in this instance, if she's really going to be with Aang, she needs to understand how important trying, not even succeeding, just trying to get more airbenders into the world so he isn't the last one, is to him. You know what I mean? And we know that they end up having 3 children. It just struck me as weird that they would wait so long. But that's more of a just me thinking kind of conjecture-y moment. I keep thinking about this movie and what it would feel like to have watched it if we didn't have Korra. I am biased because I don't like Korra, and if you guys like this video, if you're interested, I could definitely make another video going into why I dislike Korra so much. But like, if we didn't know anything about adult Aang, if we didn't have these preconceived notions of him being a terrible father, if we didn't even have any Avatar anything, maybe the comics, but not like an actual sequel series, if we went into this movie completely devoid of all of that, completely blind, what would the reception have been? It was great to watch. In some ways it felt weird, but I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. I haven't put that much thought into this. I haven't rewatched it. I haven't rewatched Korra or the original series, so I could be wrong about things. If you think that I'm wrong about something, or if you think that I have an incorrect interpretation of something, feel free to let me know in the comments. I would love to respond there. Maybe I'll make more of these rant type videos in the future. I don't know. This is my first time trying to make a YouTube video, so we'll see how it works. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and maybe consider subscribing. I stream like once or twice a week, usually some silly game, and I tend to just yap a lot, so I would love to yap more with you. That's gonna be it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day or night. All right,